Nari Kim stood at the edge of the transport platform, looking up at the massive structure floating in space before her. The Galactic Military Academy stretched across 3 kilometers of metal and glass, home to the finest warriors from dozens of worlds. Ships came and went from its docking bays like insects around a hive. This was where she would spend the next 2 years learning to fight alongside aliens she had only seen in books. The transport doors hissed open, and Nari stepped onto the station with her single bag of belongings. Around her, other new students moved with confidence. Most of them were huge. The Draknari cadets stood nearly 8 feet tall, their scaled skin gleaming under the artificial lights. Their muscled bodies moved like predators even when they walked slowly. The 4-armed Cathari were smaller but still towered over Nari, their extra limbs giving them an alien grace that made her feel clumsy just watching them. Nari checked her reflection in a nearby window. She was 22 years old but looked younger. At 5 feet and 2 inches tall, she barely reached the shoulders of most aliens here. Her black hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and her small frame made her look like a child who had wandered into the wrong place. She took a deep breath and reminded herself why she was here. Earth needed representatives in the Interstellar Defense Corps, and she had scored highest on the entrance exams. Hey, you must be human too. Nari turned to see a young man about her age walking toward her. He was taller than her but still small compared to the aliens around them. His friendly smile made her feel less alone. "I'm Tae-yoon," he said, extending his hand. "From Seoul Station." "Nari Kim," she replied, shaking his hand. "From Earth's Luna colony. Great to meet another human. I was starting to think I'd be the only one here." Tae-yoon looked around at the massive aliens moving past them. "Kind of makes you feel small, doesn't it?" Before Nari could answer, a deep voice boomed across the platform. "New students, form ranks for orientation." The voice belonged to Commander Vextal, a Draknari whose reputation reached even Earth. His scales were dark green with scars running across his arms and face. When he looked at the human students, his yellow eyes showed no warmth. "You will follow me to the training center," the commander announced. "There you will learn what it takes to serve in the Defense Corps." The group of new students followed Commander Vextal through wide corridors designed for beings much larger than humans. Nari had to walk quickly to keep up. Around her, alien students talked in their own languages, their voices deep and confident. She caught fragments of Galactic Standard and realized they were discussing the humans. "Look how small they are," one Cathari said to another. "How did they even pass the entrance tests?" "Maybe they have different standards for weaker species," came the reply. Nari's face grew hot, but she kept walking. Tae-yoon stayed close beside her, his jaw tight with anger he was trying to control. The training center was enormous, with high ceilings and equipment designed for beings of all sizes. Commander Vextal stopped in the center and turned to face the new students. "You are here because your governments believe you can serve the galaxy," he began. "I will determine if they are right. Combat training begins now." He pointed to a series of training mats where older students were practicing. "Physical assessment first. We need to know what you can do." The alien students moved to the equipment with confidence. Nari watched a Draknari cadet lift weights that would have crushed her. A Cathari used all 4 arms to work a complex combat machine, moving faster than her eyes could follow. "Humans, you're up," Commander Vextal called. Nari and Tae-yoon approached the testing area. A massive Cathari cadet stood nearby, watching them with obvious amusement. This was Gorlak, one of the senior students. His 4 arms were thick with muscle, and he stood nearly 9 feet tall. "The human female first," Commander Vextal ordered. Nari stepped up to the strength testing machine. She had trained for months on Earth, but she knew she could not match alien power. She gripped the handles and pulled with all her strength. The machine registered her effort and displayed a number that made several aliens laugh. 67 standard units, Commander Vextal read from the display. "The Academy minimum is 80. Gorlak stepped forward with a grin that showed too many teeth. "Let me show how it's done," he said. He grabbed the machine with 2 of his arms and pulled casually. The display shot up to over 300 units. "Perhaps the little human should try something easier," Gorlak suggested. "Like cleaning the dormitories." More laughter came from the alien students. Nari felt her face burn with embarrassment, but she kept her expression calm. She had expected this. The testing continued with worse results. Her speed was average compared to most species. Her reflexes were good, but nothing special. When it came to the combat simulation, She was knocked down repeatedly by opponents who were barely trying. "This is pathetic," one Draknari student whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Why are we wasting time with creatures this week?" Commander Vextel watched everything with his arms crossed. When the testing finished, he looked at Nari with what might have been disappointment. "Human female, your scores are the lowest we have recorded in 5 years, he announced. "Are you certain you belong here?" Nari straightened her shoulders and looked directly into his yellow eyes. "Yes, sir. I belong here. We shall see," the commander replied. "Training begins at dawn. Try not to break." As the group dispersed, Gorlak approached Nari. Up close, he was even more intimidating. His forearms could probably tear her apart without effort. "Little human," he said, his voice quiet but menacing. "You should listen to the commander. This place will break you. We eat creatures like you on my world." Nari looked up at him without backing away. "Then it's good we're not on your world," she replied calmly. Gorlak's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, other students called him away. Nari was left standing alone in the training center, surrounded by equipment built for beings twice her size. That night in her dormitory room, Nari lay on her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the darkness of space. Somewhere among them was Earth, where people were counting on her to succeed. She had known this would be difficult. The reports from previous human students had warned her about the physical challenges and the attitudes of other species. But she had also read between the lines of those reports. There were things they had not said, things about human capabilities that remained classified. Nari closed her eyes and felt something deep inside her chest, like a sleeping animal beginning to stir. The aliens here saw only her small frame and weak test scores. They did not know about human history, about the species that had climbed to the top of Earth's food chain not through strength, but through something far more dangerous. For now, she would let them think she was weak. She would endure their mockery and their tests, but if they pushed too far, if they threatened her or her mission, they would learn why humans were the only species that called their homeworld a death planet and survived to laugh about it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new humiliations. Nari was ready for both. The alarm sounded at dawn, just as Commander Vextel had promised. Nari woke instantly, her body already moving before her mind fully processed the noise. Around her, other students groaned and complained as they struggled out of their beds. She had been awake for several minutes already, watching the artificial sunrise through her window. The first week of training was designed to break the week. Nari learned this quickly as she faced challenge after challenge that seemed impossible for someone her size. The combat techniques taught at the academy relied on brute strength and natural weapons that humans simply did not possess. In hand-to-hand combat class, Instructor Kethra demonstrated a Draknari fighting style that used claws and overwhelming power. "Strike fast, strike hard, overpower your enemy," the massive instructor explained while tearing through a practice dummy. Nari tried to copy the movements, but her small fists barely dented the training equipment. Other students watched her fail and whispered among themselves. Some laughed openly when she was thrown across the mat for the 10th time in one session. "Maybe the human should try a different career," suggested a Draknari cadet named Voltar, "perhaps something that doesn't require fighting." Even worse were the strength-based challenges. Every day brought new tests that highlighted her physical limitations. Carrying heavy equipment, climbing obstacle courses designed for larger beings, and endurance runs that left her gasping while aliens barely breathed hard. But there were strange moments too. Moments that made Tae-Yoon look at her with curious eyes. During a tactical simulation, Nari surprised everyone by predicting enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. While other students relied on sensors and computer analysis, she seemed to know where attacks would come from before they happened. "How did you know they would flank left?" Tae-Yoon asked after she had called out the correct warning 3 times in a row. Nari shrugged. It just made sense. They were trying to look like they would go right, but their formation was wrong for that kind of attack. The instructor running the simulation, a human woman named Da-Eun Park, watched Nari with thoughtful eyes but said nothing. There was also the incident in medical training. All students had to undergo regular health scans to monitor their condition during the intense training. When Nari's results came back, the medical technician frowned at his screen. "These readings are unusual," he muttered, checking his equipment. Heart rate variability is off the charts, muscle density doesn't match visual assessment, and brain activity patterns are interesting. Is something wrong? Nari asked. Probably just calibration issues with human physiology, the technician replied, dismissing the strange readings. We don't get many of your species here, but Nari noticed Instructor Park nearby taking notes. The harassment from other students grew worse as the days passed. Gorlak seemed to take personal pleasure in making her life difficult. He and his friends would accidentally bump into her in the corridors, sending her stumbling. They would take her food from the dining hall, claiming they needed more nutrition for their larger bodies. Small acts of cruelty that stayed just within academy rules. You should report them, Tae-yoon suggested one evening as they sat in their dormitory common area. He had a bruise on his face from his own encounters with hostile students. Report what? Nari asked. That they're bigger than me? That they think I don't belong here? The instructors probably agree with them. She was wrong about at least one instructor. Daeun Park had been watching both human students carefully. As a tactical specialist and former Earth military officer, she knew things about human capabilities that weren't in the public files. She also knew about certain classified programs that selected individuals with specific genetic markers. After another failed combat session where Nari had been easily defeated by a Cathari half her opponent's size, Park approached her. Walk with me, Cadet Kim, she said quietly. They walked to an observation deck overlooking the training areas. Below them, alien students practiced with weapons and vehicles designed for galactic warfare. How do you feel about your progress? Park asked. Honestly, I feel like everyone was right. Maybe I don't belong here. Nari stared out at the stars beyond the academy. Your test scores say otherwise. Your tactical assessments are exceptional. Your theoretical knowledge is among the best in your class. Park paused. But you're holding back in combat. I'm not holding back. I'm just not strong enough. Strength isn't everything, Cadet. Earth didn't become a galactic power through strength. Park's voice carried a weight that made Nari look at her more carefully. Do you know why humans are the only species that calls their homeworld a death planet? Because Earth is dangerous? Because humans are dangerous. We just learned to hide it very well. Park turned to face Nari directly. Your psychological profile suggests you have certain capabilities, but they've never been activated. What kind of capabilities? The kind that only surface under extreme stress. The kind that kept our species alive when everything on Earth was trying to kill us. Park's expression was serious. Be careful, Cadet Kim. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Before Nari could ask what she meant, Park walked away, leaving her alone with more questions than answers. That night, the harassment escalated. Nari returned to her dormitory to find her belongings scattered across the floor. Her personal tablet was broken, her clothes torn, and her food rations missing. A message was scratched into her desk. Go home, little human. She cleaned up the mess in silence, ignoring the stares from other students who had clearly watched it happen without intervening. When Tae-yoon saw the damage, his face went dark with anger. This has gone too far, he said. We have to do something. Like what? Fight them? You've seen how that goes. Then we report it. We demand protection. Nari looked at her ruined belongings and felt something cold settle in her stomach. Protection won't help. It will just make us look weaker. So what do you suggest? We endure, we learn, and we remember every insult, every humiliation, every act of cruelty. Her voice was quiet, but there was something in her tone that made Tae-yoon take a step back. The next morning brought a new challenge. Zero-gravity combat training in the asteroid field surrounding the academy. Students would work in pairs, practicing maneuvers in the dangerous environment of floating rocks and radiation fields. Gorlak volunteered to partner with Nari, his smile promising trouble. Don't worry. Little human, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. I'll take good care of you out there. Commander Vextal approved the pairing despite the obvious size mismatch. As they prepared for the exercise, Nari checked her equipment twice. Something felt wrong, but she couldn't identify what. Instructor Park appeared beside her as she sealed her helmet. Remember what I told you, Cadet, she said quietly. Some capabilities only emerge under pressure. What did you mean about doors that can't be closed? But Park was already walking away, and Commander Vextal was calling for the exercise to begin. Nari and Gorlak launched into space together, connected by safety lines to prevent them from drifting into the asteroid field. Around them, Other student pairs practiced combat maneuvers in the zero-gravity environment. Such a pretty view, Gorlak commented as they drifted between massive floating rocks. It would be terrible if someone had an accident out here. Nari felt that cold feeling in her stomach grow stronger. Through her helmet, she could see Gorlak's expression, and she realized that Park had been right about doors that couldn't be closed. Some things, once awakened, changed everything forever. The asteroid field was beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Massive rocks tumbled slowly through space, some as large as buildings, others no bigger than a person's fist. Radiation from the nearby star created dancing lights across their surfaces, while the Academy station hung in the distance like a metal moon. Nari floated beside Gorlak, connected to him by a safety line that was supposed to keep them both secure during the training exercise. Her suit felt heavier than usual, though she couldn't understand why. Zero gravity meant weight shouldn't matter. Communications check, came Commander Vextal's voice through their helmets. All pairs report status. One by one, the other student teams confirmed they were ready. Nari could see them scattered throughout the asteroid field, practicing combat maneuvers in the strange environment of space. Pair 7 ready, Gorlak reported for both of them, his voice cheerful over the radio. Begin exercise, the commander ordered. Gorlak immediately moved toward a large asteroid, pulling Nari along with their connecting line. Let's practice some basic maneuvers, little human, he said, though his voice was only reaching her now, not broadcasting to the instructors. They landed on the asteroid's surface with magnetic boots that locked them in place. Around them, the other pairs were practicing hand-to-hand combat adapted for zero gravity. Using the asteroids as anchor points. Your turn to attack, Gorlak said, positioning himself in a defensive stance. Nari moved forward carefully, trying to remember the techniques they had learned. In zero gravity, momentum was everything. She launched herself at Gorlak, but he easily caught her and spun her around using her own force against her. Too slow, he commented. Try again. They practiced for several minutes, with Gorlak easily defeating every attack Nari attempted. But she noticed something troubling. Each time he deflected her attacks, he moved them closer to the edge of the asteroid. And each time he grabbed her, his hands lingered near her life support controls. Time for something more interesting, Gorlak said suddenly. Before Nari could ask what he meant, she felt him doing something to the back of her suit. There was a soft hiss and warning lights began flashing inside her helmet. Oxygen leak detected, her suit's computer announced calmly. Estimated time remaining 15 minutes. Gorlak, my life support is failing, Nari said over the radio, keeping her voice steady despite the fear growing in her chest. Oh no, Gorlak replied, his concern sounding fake even over the radio static. That's terrible. Don't worry, little human. Help will come soon. But Nari could see through his helmet visor that he was smiling, and worse, she could see that he had something in his hand, a small tool that could be used to damage suit seals. Commander Vextal, this is Pair 7, Gorlak broadcast. The human is experiencing technical difficulties with her life support. Requesting emergency pickup. Negative, Pair 7, came the reply. Exercise is not complete. Solve the problem with available resources. Nari's heart sank. Standard procedure was to help each other during emergencies, but Gorlak had been the cause of her emergency. She looked at her suit's diagnostic screen and realized the damage was worse than a simple leak. Multiple seals had been compromised in a way that suggested deliberate sabotage. Gorlak, you need to help me, she said over a private channel. Help you with what? His voice was innocent, but his eyes showed malice. Your suit is just having technical problems. These things happen to inferior equipment. You damaged my suit deliberately. Prove it. Gorlak's smile grew wider. And even if someone believed you, it would be your word against mine. Who do you think they'll believe? A respected senior cadet or a weak little human who doesn't belong here? Nari felt her air getting thinner. 10 minutes now, according to her computer. Around them, other student pairs continued their exercises, unaware that she was slowly dying. Why are you doing this? She asked. Because you're an insult to this academy, Gorlak replied, his voice turning harsh. Watching you fail at every task, seeing you take up space that should go to a real warrior, it makes me sick. You humans think you can join the galactic community as equals, but you're just primitives from a backwater planet. 8 minutes of air remaining. Nari tried to use her emergency repair kit, but the damage was too extensive. Gorlak had known exactly what to break to make repairs impossible with basic tools. She could see the Academy station in the distance, but it might as well have been on the other side of the galaxy. You know what the best part is? Gorlak continued, now enjoying himself. When they investigate your accident, they'll find that your suit was just too fragile for the mission. Poor little human. Not tough enough for real military work. Maybe they'll think twice before sending more of your kind here. 5 minutes. Nari closed her eyes and tried to think. Her training had covered emergency procedures, but none of them applied when your partner was the source of the emergency. She was going to die out here, floating in the darkness between asteroids, and everyone would think it was just another human failure. Through her helmet, she could see Gorlak watching her with satisfaction. He was already preparing his story about the tragic accident that claimed the life of a cadet who just wasn't strong enough for military service. 3 minutes. Something inside Nari's chest began to burn. Not from the thin air, but from something deeper. Something that had been sleeping since she was born. Waiting for a moment like this, she opened her eyes and looked at Gorlak. Really looked at him. And for the first time since arriving at the Academy, she wasn't seeing a superior being who could easily defeat her. She was seeing prey. 2 minutes. Nari's vital signs display inside her helmet began showing readings that should have been impossible. Her heart rate climbed beyond normal human limits but remained steady. Her brain activity spiked in patterns that the suit's computer couldn't interpret. And her muscle tension reading suggested strength that her small frame shouldn't have been able to generate. Interesting, she said quietly, her voice taking on a tone that made Gorlak's smile falter slightly. What's interesting, dying human? You actually thought this would work. Nari began moving toward her equipment pack with a purpose that hadn't been there before. You looked at me and saw weakness, just like your species always does. 1 minute of air remaining. Nari's hands moved over her damaged life support system with sudden confidence. She wasn't trying to repair it anymore. Instead, she was rebuilding it, using components from other systems in ways that the original designers had never intended. What are you doing? Gorlak asked, and for the first time he sounded uncertain. Surviving, Nari replied. It's what humans do. Her vital signs flatlined briefly on the monitoring system, sending alerts to the Academy station. But before rescue teams could react, the signals returned, stronger than before and showing readings that shouldn't have been possible for any known species. When Nari opened her eyes again, they reflected the starlight in a way that made Gorlak take an involuntary step backward. Her movements were different now, more fluid and controlled. The air in her suit was flowing again, recycled through a life support system that now functioned better than its original design. How? Gorlak whispered. Nari looked at him through her helmet visor, and her expression was nothing like the gentle, struggling cadet who had arrived at the Academy weeks ago. This was the face of something that had climbed to the top of a planet full of creatures designed to kill it. Because you made a mistake, Gorlak, she said softly. You forgot that humans didn't become a galactic species by being weak. We became one by being more dangerous than anything that tried to stop us. She began moving toward him with purpose. And suddenly Gorlak realized that he was alone in space with something that he had awakened, but didn't understand. Something that was no longer pretending to be harmless. The return to the Academy station was silent. Nari and Gorlak docked their training pod without speaking, but the tension between them filled the small space like a living thing. Gorlak kept glancing at Nari from the corner of his eye, as if trying to understand what had happened in the asteroid field. Nari's life support system was functioning perfectly now, better than it had ever worked before. The readings from her suit had confused the technical staff who downloaded the data. According to their instruments, she had somehow rebuilt a complex system in minutes using only basic tools and spare parts. Impossible readings, the technician muttered as he reviewed the data. Must be sensor errors, but Instructor Daon Park was not dismissing the readings. She stood in the observation deck watching Nari walk through the station corridors, and her expression was troubled. She had seen reports like this before, from classified files that most people would never read. Word of the technical malfunction spread quickly through the Academy. Most students saw it as proof that human equipment was inferior, just another example of why Earth species didn't belong among real warriors. But a few noticed that Nari walked differently now. Her movements were more controlled, more purposeful. Taeyun met her in the dormitory common area. Are you okay? I heard your life support failed during the exercise. I'm fine, Nari replied. and her voice carried a calmness that hadn't been there before. What really happened out there? Nari looked at her friend and saw genuine concern in his eyes. Gorlak sabotaged my equipment. He tried to kill me. What? We have to report this immediately. With what proof? He damaged my suit in a way that looked like equipment failure. His word against mine. Nari sat down across from Tai-Yun. But I learned something important today. What? That I'm tired of being afraid. Before Tai-Yun could ask what she meant, Gorlak entered the common area with several of his friends. They were laughing about something, probably another joke at human expense. When Gorlak saw Nari, his laughter stopped. Little human, he said, approaching their table. I heard you had some trouble today. Such a shame when inferior equipment fails at critical moments. Nari stood up slowly, and something in her movement made the entire room go quiet. Other students stopped their conversations and turned to watch. Gorlak, she said calmly, I challenge you to formal combat. The silence in the room became complete. Formal challenges were rare at the academy, reserved for serious disputes that couldn't be resolved through normal means. They were usually fought between students of similar size and capability. Gorlak stared at her for a moment, then burst into laughter. His friends joined in, and soon half the room was laughing at the idea of the small human challenging the massive Kethari. You challenge me? Gorlak asked between laughs. Little human, I could break you with one arm. Then it should be easy for you to accept, Nari replied. The laughter died as students realized she was serious. Gorlak's expression shifted from amusement to something darker. Fine, he said. If you want to be humiliated in front of everyone, I'll be happy to help. No weapons, no rules, no mercy. Perfect, Nari agreed. Those are exactly the terms I wanted. Within an hour, word had spread throughout the academy. Students gathered in the main training center to watch what everyone expected to be a brief and brutal demonstration of the differences between species. Even some instructors came to observe, though Commander Vextal looked disgusted by the whole affair. This is pointless, he muttered to Instructor Park. The human will be injured, and we'll have paperwork to complete. Maybe, Park replied quietly. Or maybe we're about to learn something important about human capabilities. The training center was packed with spectators. Alien students filled the viewing areas, chattering excitedly about the coming fight. Most had placed bets on how quickly Gorlak would win. Nari and Gorlak faced each other in the center of the combat mat. The size difference was even more obvious here. Gorlak stood nearly 9 feet tall with forearms thick with muscle. Nari looked like a child standing next to him. Last chance to surrender, little human, Gorlak said loud enough for everyone to hear. I don't want to hurt you too badly. Nari looked up at him, and for the first time since arriving at the academy, she smiled. It wasn't the polite, nervous smile she had worn before. This was something else entirely, something that made several observers take an unconscious step backward. You tried to kill me today, she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the silent room. You sabotaged my life support and left me to die in space. You thought I was too weak to matter. Gorlak's confidence faltered slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. But here's what you didn't know about humans, Nari continued, her voice growing stronger. We didn't become the dominant species on our planet through strength. We did it through being more dangerous than everything that tried to kill us. The combat bell rang, signaling the start of the fight. Gorlak rushed forward immediately, intending to end the fight with one overwhelming attack. His forearms reached for Nari, ready to grab her and throw her across the mat just as he had done countless times in training. But Nari wasn't there. She moved like nothing the aliens had ever seen. Not with the brute power of a Draknari or the multi-limbed grace of a Cathari, but with something uniquely human. She flowed around Gorlak's attack like water, and suddenly she was behind him. Gorlak spun around, confused. How had something so small moved so fast? Nari attacked then, and the watching crowd gasped. She didn't try to match Gorlak's strength or fight the way other species fought. Instead, she fought like a human, with terrifying intelligence and surgical precision. Every strike she made was calculated for maximum effect. She hit nerve clusters that paralyzed Gorlak's arms temporarily. She targeted joints and pressure points that larger species didn't know existed. When Gorlak tried to grab her with his massive hands, she used his own momentum against him, turning his strength into a weakness. What is she doing? A Draknari student whispered. Fighting like a predator, Instructor Park replied quietly. Gorlak began to panic. Nothing he tried worked. The small human was everywhere and nowhere, hitting him from angles he couldn't defend against. Worse, she was talking to him as she fought. "Your species evolved strength," Nari said as she dodged another clumsy grab and struck a nerve cluster in his shoulder. "Ours evolved intelligence." She spun around his next attack and kicked behind his knee, sending him stumbling forward. "You grew claws and fangs," she continued, her voice perfectly calm. "We learned to make tools that were sharper than any claw." Gorlak tried to use all four arms at once, but Nari seemed to anticipate every move. She flowed between his attacks like she could read his mind. "Your ancestors were apex predators," she said, landing a strike that made Gorlak cry out in pain. "Ours learned to hunt apex predators for sport." The watching crowd was completely silent now. This wasn't what anyone had expected to see. The small human was systematically dismantling an opponent who should have been able to defeat her easily. Gorlak fell to his knees, all four arms hanging useless at his sides. Nari had struck nerve clusters that left him unable to move properly. He looked up at her with fear in his eyes. "You mocked my fragile frame," Nari said, leaning close so only he could hear. "This fragile frame belongs to the species that hunted megafauna to extinction with pointed sticks. We are what monsters have nightmares about." She straightened up and looked around the silent training center. Every alien eye was fixed on her, and in those eyes she saw something that hadn't been there before: respect and fear. "The fight is over," she announced calmly. Nobody argued. The training center remained silent for long minutes after Nari's victory. Gorlak sat on the combat mat, slowly regaining feeling in his arms as the nerve strikes wore off. Around them, alien students stared with expressions ranging from shock to fear to something that might have been awe. Commander Vextal was the first to move. He approached Nari with slow, careful steps, as if she were a dangerous animal that might attack without warning. "Cadet Kim," he said formally, "report to my office immediately." Nari nodded and followed the commander out of the training center. Behind them, the crowd finally began to whisper among themselves, their voices filled with confusion and uncertainty. Everything they thought they knew about humans had just been proven wrong. In his office, Commander Vextal sat behind his desk and studied Nari with new eyes. The small human who had scored the lowest physical assessment in Academy history had just defeated one of their strongest students without breaking a sweat. "Explain what I just witnessed," he ordered. "A fight, sir. Cadet Gorlak challenged me and I accepted. You know that's not what I mean." The commander leaned forward. "Those were not techniques taught at this academy. That level of speed and precision is not consistent with your previous performance." Before Nari could answer, the office door opened and Instructor Park entered without permission. Commander Vextal started to object, but Park held up a data pad that made him stop. "Authorization code 77 Alpha, Park said. "I'm assuming command of this situation under Earth military intelligence protocols." The commander's eyes widened. Authorization 77 Alpha was reserved for the highest levels of galactic security. He had heard rumors of such codes but never seen one used. "Instructor Park, what is the meaning of this?" "Cadet Kim is part of a classified program," Park explained, taking a seat without being invited. "Her performance today was not unexpected. In fact, it was inevitable." Nari looked between them, confused. "What program?" Park turned to her with an expression that mixed pride and concern. "Project Awakening. Earth's military has been monitoring certain individuals with specific genetic markers for decades. People whose DNA carries dormant traits from humanity's evolutionary past." "What kind of traits?" Commander Vextal asked. "The traits that made humans the apex predator on a death world," Park replied. "Enhanced reflexes, pattern recognition abilities, stress response systems that actually improve performance under pressure. Most humans never access these capabilities because modern life doesn't require them." She gestured to Nari. "But when someone with the right genetic profile faces genuine life-threatening danger, the old programming activates. Suddenly, they're not just a modern human anymore. They're what humans were when they had to fight for survival every day." "You're saying this was planned?" Nari asked, feeling betrayed. "Not planned. Monitored." Park's voice softened. "We knew you had the potential, but we couldn't predict when or if it would manifest. What happened in the asteroid field triggered something that's been sleeping in your DNA for thousands of years." Commander Vextal was studying his datapad, reading files that had just been transmitted to him. His expression grew more troubled with each page. According to these records, Earth has been deliberately downplaying human capabilities for decades, he said slowly. Physical assessments, combat evaluations, even psychological profiles, all modified to make humans appear less threatening than they actually are. Why? He demanded, looking at Park. Because humans learned something that most species never do, Park replied. We learned that being underestimated is a tactical advantage. Let other species think we're weak and primitive. Let them believe we only earned our place in galactic society through luck or technology. It makes them careless. She stood and walked to the window overlooking the training center. Every human colony, every Earthship, every diplomatic mission, they all benefit from other species thinking we're harmless. Right up until the moment we're not. Over the following days, word of Nari's victory spread throughout the academy. The story grew with each telling, but the core truth remained unchanged. The weakest human cadet had defeated one of the strongest alien students using techniques that seemed impossible. The change in how other students treated humans was immediate and dramatic. Alien cadets who had mocked Nari and Taiyun now watched them with wary respect. The casual bullying stopped entirely. Even Gorlak, after recovering from his injuries, approached Nari with something approaching reverence. I owe you an apology, he said one day in the dining hall, and my life. If you hadn't stopped when you did, you weren't in any real danger, Nari replied. I was in control the entire time. That's what frightens me, Gorlak admitted. I couldn't tell where your limits were. For all I knew, you were just getting started. He paused, then continued more quietly. On my world, we have legends about creatures that look harmless but can kill apex predators. We call them silent death. I never believed those stories until now. The Academy's training programs were quietly restructured over the following weeks. Human students were no longer subjected to purely strength-based assessments. Instead, they were evaluated on tactical thinking, adaptability, and psychological resilience, areas where they consistently excelled. Instructor Park began teaching a new course called Interspecies Combat Psychology, with Nari as her primary assistant. The class examined how different species approached conflict and why traditional assumptions about combat effectiveness were often wrong. Many species make the mistake of equating size with danger, Park explained to a class of mixed alien students. But humans evolved on a planet where the most dangerous creatures were often the smallest. We learned to be wary of things that didn't look threatening. Nari demonstrated techniques during these classes, showing how human combat styles relied on intelligence and adaptability rather than raw power. The alien students watched with fascination and growing respect as she explained concepts that had never occurred to them. Your species developed natural weapons, she told them during one session. Claws, fangs, armored skin, multiple limbs. Humans developed something more dangerous, the ability to turn anything into a weapon and to think our way out of any situation. Commander Vextal attended several of these classes, his previous contempt for human weakness replaced by professional curiosity. He approached Nari after one particularly impressive demonstration. I owe you an apology, Cadet Kim, he said formally. I judged your species based on incomplete information. Most people do, Nari replied. We've learned to live with it. Why? Why hide your true capabilities? Nari considered the question carefully. Because a predator that looks like prey has already won half the battle before it even begins. Months later, as graduation approached, Nari stood in the same observation deck where Instructor Park had first hinted at her hidden potential. The view was the same, stars scattered across the darkness of space, with Earth somewhere among them. But everything else had changed. She was no longer the struggling cadet who couldn't meet minimum physical requirements. She was something else now, something that other species were still trying to understand. The Academy had changed too, its assumptions about human capabilities permanently altered. Taiyun joined her at the window. He had begun his own awakening process, guided by Park's careful instruction. It was a slower process for him, without the life-threatening trigger that had activated Nari's abilities. But progress was being made. Do you ever regret it? He asked. Learning what you really are? Nari thought about the question. She remembered the frightened cadet who had arrived at the academy, desperate to prove herself worthy of respect. That person was gone now, replaced by someone who no longer needed anyone's approval. No, she said finally. I just regret that it took so long. Below them, Alien cadets practiced combat techniques while human students demonstrated the tactical approaches that were becoming standard curriculum. The balance of power at the academy had shifted subtly but permanently. In her final evaluation, Commander Vextal wrote, "Cadet Kim has exceeded all expectations and redefined our understanding of human potential. Recommend immediate acceptance into advanced tactical programs. Note, suggest revision of all existing assessments of Earth's military capabilities." Nari graduated with highest honors. But more importantly, she graduated as herself, not the weak cadet who had tried to fit into alien expectations, but as something uniquely and dangerously human. As she prepared to leave the academy for her first assignment with the Interstellar Defense Corps, she carried with her a lesson that would reshape galactic understanding of humanity. Never mistake restraint for weakness, and never assume that something small and quiet isn't the most dangerous thing in the room. The galaxy was about to learn what humans had always known, that the most effective predators are the ones you never see coming.